Teaching is an inner-driven job. You're never going to get appreciated by the public. You're not going to get paid enough. You're going to have really cranky parents. You're not going to get appreciated from the outer world.
Greetings and welcome, my fellow educators, to the podcast. I'm your host, Bryan. I'm a veteran teacher who has learned a lot over the years and created this podcast long ago, early in my career, to try to motivate educators like myself and talk to people who are very successful in the classroom, get some tips from them and provide some strategies, not only for myself, but for my listening audience. And the episode I chose for today is with very special guests. My uncle, who was a retired teacher and psychologist, and my mom, who was a retired teacher and principal. Constant cheating is driving me mad, and even more, the parents who defend their kids for the cheating. This is one of the main reasons I've decided to leave teaching forever. One parent has been trying to get a hold of me since I gave her daughter and 11 others zeros for having all the exact same answers on a lab activity. I can't imagine what excuse she's going to come up with for her child's behavior. And I hope I can keep it together without going off and laughing at her face. What has been your experience with this kind of thing? So, constant cheating, parents who stand up for them.
That has happened to me before quite a few times. The parents' reactions have been different. Some of them have been very apologetic and definitely angry at the child. And then you have the parent that thinks that there's some mistake of some sort. And I remember the answer to one parental conference that I had, and I presented the exact words from the spelling test that I had picked up from the child copying down the answers. And she just said, there is no way that my child would cheat. And I just looked at her and I said, really? Oh, that's wonderful. How do you do that? Because my child's cheated before. And your child has never cheated. My goodness, that is absolutely amazing. And of course, I went on and gave the child a 0 for the grade. And I wasn't going to move it. She knew I wasn't going to move it.
And James, how would you approach that situation?
As a teacher, to me, it's a goal to set up some parameters of myself, which is to present behavior such as the duplication of answers or the perfect answer or whatever is the cheated material. And maybe even ask the parent to see how they would possibly explain it. I don't spend a lot of time on the label of cheating. I just say this is a mystery to me that I cannot solve because, once again, it appears to be cheating. I use those kinds of phraseology because, once again, I did not see it. I have very little documentation except that what appears to be a cheating response. So, until I can have it clarified for me, I'm going with my assumption is whenever I have seen this behavior, it appears to be cheating. And that way I don't try to tap into that parent who, just like Evelyn was saying, so many parents identify with their children that if their children are being criticized, then they're being criticized.
Absolutely.
And they can't handle that. They don't want to be criticized. I use a lot of phrasing such as appears or it seems to be. This is a mystery that I'm operating just on what I see without necessarily saying it is cheating. It has to be cheating. I have seen cheating. Anything that is so locked in that I don't have wiggle room. If the child does admit to it or the parent admits to it, or if we have a parent who apologizes, then that's something else. But I go by what I can see, and therefore I respond and say, when it appears to be cheating, you get a 0.
Well, once I saw her doing it, picked it up, had it in my hand, there was little that she could say, really, after that.
And some students will confess.
Right,
and
they
some
will. They will.
Claim, that they were innocent or somebody else's fault. So it really just depends on the situation. And
well, there's a lot of it's someone else's fault. I mean, we've talked about victimology quite a bit, and there's a lot of it in our culture. That it's always somebody else's fault.
Yeah.
That why they're having to cheat, whether it's the dog ate the homework kind of approach, or the pressure that my parents are making me get 100%, or I need to do it in order to go out on a date this weekend, or any other kinds of excuses. But there's a great deal of excuse giving. It doesn't matter. The key thing is the very last thing is this is unacceptable behavior.
Mm-hmm. I remember in fact, it was with you when you were in first grade. And I remember saying you brought home some bad papers. And I said, I do not want to see these papers like this again. I want you to do better because I know you can do better. And it seemed like that you were bringing home better papers after that. And so I went to see your teacher, and she said, well, he's not really doing that much better. And I said, well, where are the papers? And you had them stuffed in your desk. In other words, you were following my direction of I don't want to see those papers anymore. So you just thought, well, all right, she doesn't want to see them, so I'm going to stuff them in her desk.
I guess I'll play the victim role and blame you.
Right. I was completely liable for that.
I don't even remember that instance there. Wow.
Yeah.
Makeup work for students on vacation. And she says, we have a recurring issue at my school with students going on vacations during non-vacation time. For example, I had a student go out of town with his family last week for about 5 days. And we have another student who's going away with her family for a week next week. Both students' families requested work in advance so their children wouldn't be behind when they returned. If there was an occasional instance, I wouldn't have a problem with it. However, I'm in a school full of well-to-do families who regularly take their children out of school for ski trips, Disneyland weekends, family vacations, and so on. So I'm having to gather all this makeup work in advance all the time, and this gets tedious. I always have makeup work when a child returns from an illness or a day or two from another excused absence. But I'm really thinking of installing a policy next year where I will not send any work in advance for unexcused absences. This is really frustrating, especially when the parents ask me the day before they're leaving to send a week's worth of work with their child. She says she knows the school doesn't like it, but they do it anyway. Any feedback would be appreciated. So how should she handle that situation?
Well, that is certainly something that has changed significantly since I was in teaching. It is a major change. It's a change in our society. Parents did not do that, and therefore I really don't have a lot of experience. My philosophy was that if it's the excused absence, then you get to make up the work. You don't ask for work in advance. And the times that it did happen, I just said, well, you and your family have a choice. You either are here for the school and what we offer, or you're not. And if you're not, then it's unexcused, and whatever the school policy for unexcused absences is that. I did not spend a lot of time with that flexible individual approach. I noticed that that is a behavior that has changed. More and more parents now seem to think that it's okay, and they get non-school education. Well, that's fine, but they shouldn't get school credit for non-school education.
Well, I would usually have them write up a report about what they saw and what they did and deliver it back to the class. I mean, I couldn't give them credit for the tests that they missed. I mean, like if they took 5 tests in a 6 weeks period, well, then they got credit for the 5 tests.
This does happen frequently because I recently had an incident where I had a student was going on a cruise the day before he was about to leave, wanting a week's worth of work. My tactic was, obviously, I'm not ready to do that for him, so I would just work with him when he came back.
And I think one of the things this demonstrates is that we have 3 different approaches. Which one is she comfortable with? Which one is she willing to take the flak with? Because no matter which approach is taken, whether it's from the other students who stay while the student's off cruising, or whether they are not getting any work, or whether the teacher is going to be giving work, all of these are individual decisions. And like so much of teaching, it comes down to what is your basic core philosophy? What are your values? What are you trying to instill in your students? And is your behavior meeting those standards?
Does it kind of cheapen education to the point where it makes school seem like a babysitting service? Like, well, we can afford to take them out for 5 days and just give us some worksheets and hand out. Because in reality, you miss 5 days of school. It's missing a whole lot. And
Right. And well, see, it's not worksheets that they're missing.
exactly.
They're missing instruction, and you can't make that up.
Absolutely.
Well, but some parents believe that they can. And, once again, does the teacher believe in what they're doing? Because for many parents, that's exactly what school is. It's a babysitting service, something to take care of their children so they don't have to. That's why it's so important to me, anyway, is for each teacher to define what goes on in their classroom and what are the values and importance of being there as versus not being there. I've seen some teachers that it doesn't matter whether the children are there or on a cruise because they're not getting anything. I mean, it's totally irrelevant. But
Right.
I always thought that if a student missed my class, they missed something.
Right.
Something that they could not make up or duplicate because they weren't there.
It just seems like, to me, it just cheapens your class and school process. Spring break, Christmas break, summers, by all means, we're not against family travel by any stretch of the imagination.
And
have that time.
And they have plenty of time in the school year to go on family trips. They just don't want to be inconvenienced by the crowds.
Yes.
Or the same thing with their work schedule, where the parents may have an opportunity to take time off at a time that's not conducive to the school calendar.
Well, that's true.
But once again, that's a price.
Mm-hmm.
And the parents have to make the final decision as to whether they're going to go ahead with what the school is offering or whether they want to go down to Disney World with what it's offering.
Mm-hmm.
Because after all, in our society, parents are the final judge on what they do for their children.
Exactly.
But we want to encourage you to not make it where it's really frustrating and overwhelming and stressful on your part, where you're trying to do all this extra time and effort for this kid who's going to be out vacationing for a week. So it should be their problem for missing school, not yours.
Exactly.
This is teach or not to teach, and it's pretty long, so I'm going to just try to summarize here. I'm not sure if this is the job I want to do anymore. As a student teacher, I was mostly happy and I had great success. There were students I looked forward to seeing. I thought as soon as I got my own room, all the world would be right. But now I feel so overworked. I've had so many failures and I have no time of my own. I know summer break's coming soon, quote, not soon enough, but it is really a vacation or just downtime to create more lesson plans and develop new projects. I'd probably be obsessed and create more lesson plans. I feel like I've gone from a new teacher, this is the first year teacher, to a 10-year vet overnight with grizzled tales to boot. Seems all I do 24/7 is think about teaching or paperwork. Not to mention I've been looking around the country and the pay really stinks everywhere. How am I supposed to live all this? I can barely do it now and I have so many student loans yet to pay. It's a shame when my students drive better cars than I do. Anyway, I ended up my first year at health school, which has not helped. Perhaps my priorities are changing. I like education and teaching, but I feel like I need a teaching alternative or something else for a while. And perhaps something that pays me more. I'm considering subbing next year or finding a staff position rather than taking on a second year of being a classroom teacher. Maybe that way I can clear my head a little and figure out what to do next. What going through is what so many beginning teachers start off with of student teaching is incredible. They've seen Dead Poet Society and this is a great experience, and they get into reality and reality overwhelms them and makes them think, what in the world did I do? And should I even come around and put up with this next year?
First thing, as you were reading it, two things came to mind. One is the grass is always greener on the other side. It doesn't matter what your first job is. It always makes you wonder. Whether you're looking at your students' cars or looking at something else, there's always that greener grass on the other side. I just say that as a generalization. And the second is, I remember my first year was a year from hell. I mean, it was absolutely atrocious. One of the things is I learned more about myself and what I could do and what was important to me the first year than almost any year since then. It's kind of like the forging by fire, because it really does force you to say, what in the world do I want to do with this life? Where do I want to work? Because it's something that has to come from inner, because teaching is an inner-driven job. You're never going to get appreciated by the public. You're not going to get paid enough. You're going to have really cranky parents. We're talking about those parents that support cheating students. You're not going to get appreciated from the outer world, so you have to have it inner. And the first year to me was the year for doing that. It was hard. It was difficult. But fortunately, I had a 2-year commitment. So I had to go to the second year in order to pay it off. And after the second year, I finally realized, like so many other things, every job has its assets. Every job has its liabilities. And was I suited for them? And every year does become better because you have more experience. But the key thing is the first year I was going in because I owed the state of Maryland for a year of teaching. And by the end of the second year, I realized the state of Maryland didn't care one iota about me. My principal didn't care about me. Nobody cared about me except me. And once I realized that, then I realized, yes, this teaching has a value because it meets my need.
And it sounds to me it's suffering from burnout. And I wanted to pass on to him probably one of the very few workshops that I attended on teacher burnout and got something from. And that was the fact I found myself falling in this trap of taking things home. Once you leave that school, leave the school, leave the kids, leave the parents, leave everything that's there and turn to another life. I remember after my first year, we'd left the school. That was it. There was no bringing all these things home because you feel completely overwhelmed if you work all day and you work all night and you bring those things constantly remind you of school. Please remember, you're never done in education.
Never.
If you're going to stay until you get everything done, you won't have to pitch a tent. And the summertime, by the way, always comes at just the right time in a teacher's life. It's probably the only profession that I know that requires 2 months to recover from. Don't teach summer school. Do something entirely different on your vacation. And you'll come back refreshed, a better teacher.
Also, remember that student teaching, you're working with a teacher who has experience.
Yes.
And by the time you arrive, the teacher's already organized everything.
Right. Get everything organized.
And knows what works for them. And so it's really very, very self-defeating to compare your efforts with a veteran teacher.
That's why I wish they had student teaching from the first week of school so these new teachers can see how to set up a school year rather than coming in the springtime after everything's been structured.
That would be very valuable because springtime, that classroom is organized the way the teacher wants it and where the children receive most benefit. And if you go in there at the very beginning, you can see how it's set up. Teaching is probably the most meaningful profession that I have ever been in. Where else can you influence a child's life? And you're doing it. You may not think you're doing it until you see them 10 years later and they stop you in the grocery store and say, boy, I sure remember you introducing this and that. And it's something that goes on with time. So don't judge yourself too harshly.
But we can agree that teaching is not for everyone.
Oh, I agree.
But probably a first year is not ample enough evidence for you to make a decision. And at least if you put in another year, maybe another school system or teaching somewhere else, that can give you some more answers. So you're not looking back on your life thinking, well, what would have happened if I'd stayed? And like your situation, James, it ended up getting better. And
Exactly.
My encouragement, give it another year. He may just need another school. Maybe he would do better in some other school situation.
Right.
Well, this has been a podcast for teachers by a teacher. I want to thank my guest, Evelyn.
You're certainly welcome. Pleasure to be here.
And James.
Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you guys back. Stay encouraged, teachers. So keep doing what you're doing, and we'll talk to you again soon.